What's up, Cougar Nation, and welcome again aboard the Hype Train podcast. I am your host, Joe Wheat. That's at Joey27 on Twitter. As always, with my boys, Trevor Levitt and Deseret News BYU beat writer Jackson Payne, as Hunter Miller continues to travel the world and continues to forget that he has obligations to his team, to this podcast. Does he not know that this is vital to BYU's performance that he is on the pod?
I don't think Hunter wants it enough. I don't think he wants it enough like we do.
I don't like he's watching the Celtics.
Misses you, Hunter.
He's watching. He's out here watching the Celtics as if there's not already an NBA team residing in Provo, Utah, that's a block away. Like he could, like if he wants to go watch a future NBA champion, just go watch Jagger Demon last night. We have the same season tickets.
No, nobody on the Celtics will love Hunter as much as Townsend Triple does. Okay, I mean, I don't know what he's trying to find. He already has what he wants.
Townsend Triple did not sacrifice his playing time to bring on Keba Keita and Malo Mag and Cannon Catchings and Jagger Demon. He did not sacrifice this much for Hunter to continue to travel cross country to watch the bum ass Boston Celtics.
No
frauds.
No man hath greater love than this. That's Townsend Triple to give up his playing time for NBA talent.
Oh man. I want to start the podcast off with a question that just occurred to me as we were preparing to come on the pod. Is this are we in 2020 all over again, but like different? Because the basketball team is dope. It's projected to be dope. The future looks dope. BYU football is undefeated in November. We got disrespect coming from the college football playoff committee. We got Utah fans and BYU fans arguing on the timeline like you wouldn't believe. And we also, oh, by the way, we also have a presidential election. Like, are we back? Like, are we back to our roots? Like, this is when the hype train was born. Was in this time.
Well, you even brought back the graphic this year too.
Yeah.
So it's like it's all come full circle.
And speaking of not living up to obligations, I feel like I haven't lived up to my obligations as the hype train conductor to not continually update this graphic, this Snapchat Photoshop job I've done over the last 4 years. The problem is there's just too much going on that I can't possibly keep up with it. It is so hard. Like you don't think it's that hard to just Google Nicole Auerbach's name, cut out her picture on Snapchat, throw it on the hype train graphic, and quote tweet whatever post she has about justice for BYU. You'd think that's easy. And it is. Where it gets harder is when it's not just him, it's Tom Fornelli, when it's Chris Vanini, when it's Brett McMurphy, like when with Jackson Payne, we got him.
I just want to be on the graphic, Joe.
And that's the other problem is every time I post it, there's like 85 BYU fans that Jonathan Tavernari won't return my calls because he has been left off the graphic this entire time. Like there's just too much going on and I can't keep up with it. I got a full-time job.
It feels like this is like the iOS update from 2020. Right? Like, I mean,
yeah, no, I agree.
In 2020, BYU is taking the very unconventional path to the CFP rankings, right? It was almost like they were playing a different sport. Like obviously it's still football, but like the way they were scheduling and the way they were blowing out these not great teams. And then when they would play a good team, they'd still blow them out, right? Like now BYU's winning a competitive Big 12 right now. And it's the same disrespect. And so I hope it's not 2020 because I don't want to wake up tomorrow and be in a missionary apartment because I was on my mission when the hype train officially started. My life's a little bit better than that of a missionary.
Dude, you did not have to tell me that. I feel old as heck.
I know, me too. I've been home like 8 years now.
Goodness, I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary of leaving on my mission, and Jackson Payne has the nerve to tell me that he wasn't around to watch his Lord and Savior Zach Wilson sling it against Texas State.
I mean,
that was sacrilegious. I apologize.
I mean, I forgive you, but I saw enough that year to buy in. I ended up at Buffalo Wild Wings at the exact perfect time to see all the games, and I'm just kidding.
Oh, you are a sinner.
No. True. Actually, the bowl game So I had a companion. We would go to Buffalo Wild Wings every Tuesday because they have like the buy one get one deal. And he was like, "You just want to go because you want to watch sports," which was like kind of true. But I also was like, like it's not like I'm fine without it. Like I'm okay to sacrifice. We get there and the freaking Boca Raton Bowl starts playing as soon as we sit down because it was on a Tuesday. And he was like, "You knew about this," and I legitimately had no idea. And I was like, "Well, as long as we're here, like I hope we get to see like some action." And I think within like the first 8 minutes of the game, BYU had 28 points. Like Zach was zacking. It was magical. So I got a very unique seat on the hype train that year. But like I said, this is improved 2020, right? There's still the political turmoil. There's still the toxic nature of Twitter between the rivalry. But BYU's legit. Like you don't have to put an asterisk next to BYU, whatever they do. Like BYU belongs. BYU matters. They have a seat at the table. And it's I mean, this is what everybody's always wanted for BYU, right?
Well, it's almost like chiasmus in a way, if we really want to get religious with it, where like let's just throw out 2021 because it doesn't fit into the argument. But 2020, you got again, dope basketball team, dope football team. 2022, you got a somewhat okay, like a solid football team, really disappointing basketball team. 2023, you got an incredible like you got a really solid basketball team with a really bad football team. And now 2024, they're both awesome again. And so again, we're coming full circle and we're coming for that chip. College Football Playoff Committee, do you hear me? We are not letting you shut us out again and making it like ruining all the plans, making us go across country on a 2-day trip. Dax Milne is not getting stopped at the 1 yard line this year. Darius Lassiter got in.
It's like we're living like the alternate timeline. Like, what if
how it should have gone? And
what
like,
yeah,
we won't even talk
exactly.
about the politics because I do not want to get into that. But
like, what if the Hail Mary was answered? You know, like Dax Milne was able to step over his guy in the end zone, and it's Dax Milne. But you brought up Jackson, kind of an interesting point. Joe, you said before the show we can decide where this is going to go. Let's address the CFP rankings just right away.
Okay, let's do it.
Because Jackson, you brought up that BYU has a seat at the table, and I think that's true. I think that they're we've got the Big 12 money. Obviously, the exposure is better. We are respected more now than we were in 2020, but it just kind of feels like yesterday the CFP said, you have a seat at the table, but for right now, it's a high chair. Like you're sitting there, but you can't really move around. I just fed my kid upstairs. He's sitting in his little bumbo thing, so I think that's probably where this is coming from. But like, you're there, but your autonomy, like your ability to move, is still dictated by everybody else there, and I think coming into the podcast, I was kind of just like, I'm just glad to be here. And I am, like, to a point, like just being number 9 is great. Could not ask for a better time to have BYU get disrespected again than a couple of days before going into the Holy War. But it is a little frustrating to realize that despite jumping into the Power 4 like level, we're still logo watching. Like, we're still looking at the stickers on the side of the helmets, and that's ultimately deciding who goes where. And then when the two logos are not what they're used to seeing in Indiana and BYU, then they go, okay, well, what conference are they from? Big 10? Okay, they go in front, and then Big 12 after. And so I think that was a little bit of a slap in the face to BYU fans yesterday. And probably more importantly, a big slap in the face to the team and the things that they've accomplished up to this point. But to your point, Jackson, like, I think when the initial polls came out in 2020, we were like 16th or something. So we're like 7 spots better.
I think they were like 14th.
Okay,
it was like 14, so like 14 or 15. It was
you're
low.
10 spots out versus in the middle of it.
Exactly. And so there is some respect there, but we're at the table. It's a high chair. I'm going to stick by that analogy, I think.
I just feel, I mean, I kind of side with you where it's a little ridiculous to be 9th, but like when you look at, first of all, this is the first rankings. So if BYU keeps doing their job, which is all you can really do at this point, you can only go up, right? Like if BYU goes out undefeated, they're not going to be worse than 9th unless Indiana somehow has some sort of voodoo magic on everyone, which I mean, Kirk Cignetti seems like that kind of guy. Let's be real. But like, I mean, BYU still has a first round bye with their ranking right now. Like I mean, what more could you want going into this season than for BYU to be in the middle of the playoff picture? And like you said, going into the Utah game, like they're in it, but there's still a slight there. And so that fires you up. Like now you have the incentive to go and use Joe's favorite term, style points. Go get style points at Utah. I mean, what better way to send a message to the committee, even though they probably go to bed at 6:00 on Saturdays? Let's be totally honest. What better message to send than, hey, you guys don't think we're good enough to be a top 8 team. We just beat our rival by 30 at their place, and we haven't beaten them there in 20-something years. Or I think it was 06 with Beck. So it's been almost 20 years, and you just go and thump a team that was supposed to. I mean, you can say what you want about Utah. I mean, they're still like Utah. The season sucks for them, obviously, but at least they're still the brand and the pedigree. Like people respect Whittingham. Like that people from afar will look at that and be like, "Oh my gosh, BYU beat Utah by 20-30. That's an impressive win." Even if it's not as impressive, like that just translates in that kind of conversation. And I mean, like. I just feel like this is the best case scenario, right? BYU hosting. I mean, they'd have a first round bye in the playoff. You have a chance to get that chip on your shoulder now. Kalani's really good at he's really good at embracing the underdog on this team. I will say the one thing that upset me the most is when they asked Joel Klatt about the rankings, and he had the audacity to say that BYU is not a brand. Are you kidding me? Like. We know that you hate BYU, Joel. Like, we know that you're a Pac-12 homer and that you wish you could have just gone down with that ship. But how do you explain BYU going to UCF and those fans taking over the freaking stadium in Orlando, Florida, aside from Disney? Take away Disney, that's insane, right? Like, BYU's showing out everywhere. Like, to say BYU's not a brand, I mean, I tweeted a picture yesterday. It was the CFP rankings reveal graphic on SportsCenter. The first, like, the intro to SportsCenter on the day. It was Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, and BYU. Why? Like, those are 4 brands. Like, BYU is absolutely a brand. Like, that, why would you use that against them? It's just, I mean, obviously I'm media. I'm supposed to be detached from that emotional thing, but just from
not on this show.
No. I mean, I got my hat right there, right? Like, but just from a logical standpoint, to say that BYU is not a brand is just so factually incorrect. It hurts, right? Like, that's blasphemous.
Yeah. To echo both of you guys' points, like BYU is ranked number 9. That's incredible. It takes some programs 9 years of being in a Power 5 conference to get that high. It took BYU 2, like incredible. But at the same time, like it's almost, to me, as they're revealing the rankings kind of line by line, and I see, Colorado in the top 20, I'm thinking, great. That means Kansas State is above them. Kansas State comes in at 19. And I'm like, okay, great. Top 20 win. That's great for BYU. Then as we continue to go up, I see SMU come in at number 13. And I'm like, man, that's excellent news for BYU, because now they have 2 top 20 wins. And it just felt like none of that mattered at all, because all that the committee really seemed to care about was the eye test. Like whenever they asked about any of these teams, like why was Indiana ranked ahead of BYU despite Indiana having the 103rd ranked strength of schedule, the eye test. Why was Miami ranked ahead of BYU despite not having a single top 25 opponent? Well, it was their explosive offense and the eye test, so to speak, which again, I get that and I understand that, but I saw BYU fans say it today and I laughed so hard at it. I apologize. I can't remember who said it. But it's hard for BYU to pass the eye test when the committee's eyes are closed in sleep, because BYU is playing at 8 p.m. 10 p.m. their standard time. Like the only team in the Western time, like the only team I think in the top 12 east of the Mississippi is BYU and Oregon. Is that wrong? Like there's a very clear East Coast kind of bias to whatever these rankings are. It's just clear to me that like the committee has not watched a lot of BYU this year. To your point, Jackson, about being a brand, like BYU is absolutely a brand. On a national scale, though, what BYU's brand has been historically is like Boise State, and like just like a juiced up version of Boise State that won a national championship, won a Heisman Trophy, that was considered the party crasher for the last 40 years, and now they're in the party. And I think that's still taking like that. listening to a lot of the national shows that still it's taking a while for a lot of these national guys to get used to that like BYU is a legitimate Power 5 program now, because it's just not supposed to happen this fast. Like Utah, they got that respect, after 10 years of consistently, 8, 9, 10 win seasons. That's how they built their brand. And it was such a slow build that by the time they were losing Rose Bowls, it became like an arrival, because again, it was this slow build up, where teams like TCU, I don't think get as much as respect as Utah, despite TCU having more success over the last, 25 years than Utah, because TCU's growth was a lot faster. And I think we're kind of seeing that a little bit with BYU. Like, it just, because it wasn't expected, because the preseason projections weren't there. I think it was Danny Cannell, one of the Cover 3 podcast guys, said it, that the only reason BYU and Indiana are not ranked in the top 5 is because they were not in the preseason top 25 of the AP poll, because they didn't have those preseason expectations. I think it was Tom Fornelli who said that. And I think that's accurate. Like, BYU is being penalized because they got too good too fast. And so that's why, like, you see these power ratings like FPI, SP plus, that are more predictive in nature, and what these betting spreads are based off of. All of that factors in, past years of performance. All of that still factors in preseason expectations, which are going to hurt BYU because they didn't have any preseason expectations. But when you look at the resume metrics that don't have any of that stuff baked in, BYU's got a top 5 resume. Like, BYU has as many top 25 wins as the 6 teams ranked ahead of them in the college football playoff poll. That's crazy. Like, and BYU is still somehow ranked 9th. I don't know about you guys. Like, I feel like the committee is getting away with it because they're making us fight with Indiana, when I don't think BYU's beef is with Indiana. Like, Indiana's awesome. They're 9-0. They're absolutely destroying teams. They're basically 2020 BYU, but for some reason the committee decided to give them the respect with the 103rd ranked strength of schedule, and BYU didn't get the respect with the 64th ranked strength of schedule in 2020. Whatever. Like, again, that's P5 bias. But my issue is BYU being ranked behind Tennessee. My issue is BYU being ranked behind Texas, Miami, Penn State. All of these schools, they have at most one top 25 win. I think the only of those 4 teams that have a top 25 win is Tennessee, which was Alabama. And Tennessee also has a really bad loss to an unranked Arkansas team, which barely has a winning record. Like, BYU's resume was good enough to be top 5. Does it matter today? No, because of that bye. It really doesn't matter what BYU is ranked, as long as they're ahead of Boise State. If they go take care of business, they win out, and they win the conference championship game, who cares where they're ranked? They're going to be in the same spot. What this really does is, like, BYU has a clear ceiling. And if they do drop a game here over the next 4 games, or even in the conference championship game, we have to start worrying about, okay, how far does BYU fall? Because the difference between 9 and 12 Boise State, like, in terms of spots, isn't that big. The difference between BYU being in the playoff with an at-large bid and out of the playoff, like, it just feels like the committee was just like, yeah, that's cute. Big 12's getting 1 team, so good luck. Like, it's just kind of, it felt like they had to rank BYU in the top 10 because their resume was too good, but they still don't think BYU is actually a good team.
Yeah, it feels like, and I don't want to accuse anyone of this, but some of these rankings, it kind of feels like, for some of the analysts, it's like, if BYU lost one of these Saturdays, like, that's going to be a relief for me. Like, I don't have to deal with them anymore. We can just kind of kick them out and bring whoever else in that we want. I do find it funny, Joe. I think if there's a team that we should have beef with, it's Miami. Like, the eye test, the explosive offense, like, all of those things. I find it hilarious that the 3 games that Miami has struggled this season, you brought up, like, the East Coast, like, sleeping whatever. Like, one of Miami's biggest struggle wins was against Cal. And that game ended at like 12:30, like, Mountain Time.
Well, and if you want to know something else crazy about Miami, BYU is plus 50, like what is it, plus 17 in point differential over Miami since conference play. So like, yeah, Miami has this like crazy explosive offense. That's awesome. BYU is beating teams by more in conference play than Miami. So like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, Miami is several questionable calls and questionable reviews away from having 2 losses. And I think that's where this gets a little bit insulting, is the college football committee insinuating that, well, Miami's just more fun to watch. And it's like, honestly, I don't see fans complain more about any other team in the comment section than I do Miami when it comes to like the amount of memes when the game is close for Miami, and you've got like college football Reddit and a bunch of other places that are like, well, Miami's down 3 right now. Get ready to watch the most blatant officiating rigging ever. Like, and then it kind of happens.
The Miami
like,
Chiefs.
yeah, like it's just like one of those things where like the eye test, if you want to talk about like we've had to deal with like fluky all season, like if you want to talk about fluky, like Miami's kind of fluky and they're there at 5. And here we are 4 spots back, having 2 more ranked wins than them, and really one game that came down to the wire with Oklahoma State. And we beat them. I say we, the team beat them without any sort of like questionable anything. And so if there's a team to be mad at, like, I guess it's not really Miami's fault either, but like there's definitely the gap between Miami and BYU and even Indiana is not 4 spots. And yet that's where we're at.
It feels like it's very much like the beef isn't with Indiana, like you said, like it's with Miami, and it's just with the conference hierarchy as a whole. It feels like the committee and the networks are trying to make the ACC happen. And the ACC is not a good conference, right?
I don't even think they're trying to make the ACC happen because they only have 3 teams ranked in the top 25. It's Miami. Like they're trying to make Miami happen because like SMU has a better resume than Miami with the loss. I think SMU, they have 2 more wins over ranked teams. They have more wins over teams with 5 above 500 records. Like Louisville down below. I think what are they like 23rd or something like that. Like I don't think it's so much the ACC. It's that Cam Ward is much like must-watch television, and so they think Miami is good because Cam Ward throws a really pretty football. And it's kind of the same thing with Indiana, where it's just like, ooh, pretty. Whereas they're not actually paying attention to what happens on the field.
Like, I mean, if you swapped BYU and Miami's in the Big 12 and BYU's in the ACC, do you think that makes any sort of difference? Like, I think the ACC has to help Miami in this case. I mean, obviously, I think Cam Ward's a bigger factor, but it feels like it's just – my point is that the Big 12 is being slighted. The Big 12 isn't taken seriously to the point where Miami, for having such a – like, the resume between BYU and Miami could not be more different, yet Miami is viewed as – it's the oh, that's cute versus human resources meme, right? Like, that's literally –
Again, like, well, and I hear you. I think it's more – there's certain I almost don't even think it's conference. It's like the SEC, I think, gets that benefit of the doubt from like a conference perspective. But honestly, I still think it's brands. Like the Big Ten has 4 good teams. They only have 4 teams in the top 25, and they're all in the top 8. And it's the brands that you would think. It's Ohio State, it's Penn State, it's Oregon. And then Indiana, who is in the Big Ten, if they had Michigan's logo, would probably be ranked top 3 because Michigan had an identical resume last year. They're sitting down at number 8, despite looking better than Penn State in pretty much every game that they've played. So and in the SEC, we're seeing it with Texas with 1 loss. We're seeing it with Georgia with 1 loss. We're seeing it with Alabama with 2 losses sitting inside the top 11. Like to me, if you swapped BYU and Miami and gave Miami BYU's resume, I think Miami's the number 1 team in the country, if not number 2. Because again, it's Miami, it's the U, it's the 30 for 30, it's the turnover chain, it's Ed Reed, it's Michael
Sean
Irvin,
Taylor,
Sean Taylor. Like it's the pedigree of Miami football that is the reason they're like, and again, Miami sucked for like the last 15 years, but it's just one of those programs that college football fans want Miami to be good so bad. And so they look for any reason to inflate their ranking. I think BYU honestly has kind of been a recipient of that, only to a certain point. Like, I think BYU gets put in the rankings earlier, but they have a ceiling that they can't go above, because like people think that, college football is better when BYU is good, but it's only good when BYU is ranked around like 15th, if that makes any sense. Like it's once they get up into the top 10, it's too dang high. So like to your point, like, again, I think it's more of like an individual brand thing, but I do think the Big 12 is disrespected hard stop because you got a 1-loss Iowa State who's sitting 5 spots behind Boise State, whose best win is a loss.
And truth be told too, I'm not defending the committee at all necessarily, but this bye week, like the bye week was very beneficial for BYU, but this past weekend was not beneficial for the Big 12. Kansas State goes down, Iowa State goes down. Like before, we were having conversations of an undefeated Iowa State coming in and playing an undefeated BYU for the Big 12 championship. And then if Kansas State was able to beat Iowa State, then it would be BYU and Kansas State. Well, both of those teams lost. Colorado's already had a pretty ugly loss to Nebraska. And so all of a sudden, like, I think if Kansas State had lost the week prior and Iowa State had lost this week, that maybe it doesn't actually hit as hard. But because it all happened at the same time, it was like this kind of like, it affirmed what the committee wanted to see, and then it showed on Tuesday.
And to add to your point, like the bye week kind of came at a bad time, because I think like the Indiana wasn't getting any respect for whatever reason, the 47-10 blowout of like 4 and 5 Michigan State. That was the point where everyone's like, oh, Indiana's good, y'all. Like, I don't know why that was the moment. Like, that was the win when they've had better wins. Like the Nebraska win was better than this one. But I think like if BYU converts one of their field goals into a touchdown and doesn't give up the 2 garbage time touchdowns to UCF, and they win 41-10 last weekend, and that's what's fresh in the committee's mind, I think BYU gets a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt versus winning, 37 to, what did they win? 37-24 or something like that. Like that just, again, the narrative is that BYU is flirting with disaster right now, even though they've controlled every single game they've been in except for one. I just like that's what's fueling the narrative, is BYU isn't winning by enough points. I do want to get your guys' take on this. One of my takes with the college football playoff ranking is that I think BYU actually has a little bit more wiggle room than most BYU fans think. And here's what I mean by that. I think the committee very clearly ranked these teams in tiers, similar to how the AP poll, like our boy Nate Slack is AP poll data nerd, love it, goes really deep into how many teams have how many points in the AP poll. And with the AP poll, it's kind of interesting because it tells you how the AP voters, how close they view certain teams. Because right now, the gap between BYU at number 9 and Texas at number 5, the gap in points is smaller than the gap between BYU at 9 and Boise State at 12. So like there's a very clear drop off between BYU getting 1,084 votes and Alabama getting 867 votes, 2 spots below them. And so what that means is if BYU loses, Alabama has to make up a lot more points to move ahead of BYU in order to overtake them. My thought is since the AP poll and the college football playoff rankings mirror each other so closely, I think that the gap between BYU and a school like Indiana, a school like Tennessee, a school like Penn State in the eyes of the committee is actually a lot smaller than the gap between BYU and Boise State, where if BYU does lose in the conference championship game, or if they do drop a game like a close one against Arizona State on the road, I don't think it's going to result in this precipitous drop from like 9th to 17th because BYU has a very clear floor with SMU at number 13. What do you guys think?
I think
Might be a little conspiracy theory of me, but I think the data, I think it shakes out, but
I can see where you're coming from. I think the gap, like, I disagree slightly with the point comparison between BYU and Alabama, because I think if BYU were to drop and Alabama were to beat anyone, we've seen in the past that like the committee is ready to do anything to put Alabama back in. And so I think if the conversation was more between like, say, Boise or even like,
I think Boise is the better argument than Alabama, but even Alabama, it's like, are you really going to put a 10-2 Alabama team over a 12-win BYU team that lost in the conference championship? Like, I have a really hard time accepting that, mostly because if that is the case, it's time to pick a new hobby.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like I track where you're going. I do laugh a little bit at, not on topic, but a little off. I do kind of find this narrative funny. Like, I listened to BYU Sports Nation on the way to work, and the conversation that Jerem and Spencer were having was just similar to this, where it's like, does a 12-1 team, BYU team that lost in the conference championship, get in? I believe so. Jackson, you kind of mentioned this like 20 minutes ago when we first started talking about this, but if you go 4 straight weeks now, you rattle off wins at Utah, you beat Kansas, you beat an Arizona State team who's looking really good at Arizona State, and then you top it off by beating Houston. I think Jackson's right. I think you're sitting around 5. I think you might even be 4, depending on just kind of who loses, where the rest of the games shake out. And in that case, if you lose the Big 12 championship, I think you're fine. The thing that kind of cracks me up a little bit is that it's almost gotten to the point like we're talking like, yeah, BYU is going to make the Big 12 championship, but they're going to lose. And so is BYU going to get in or not? And that to me is, if BYU goes undefeated, the conference championship game might be the most confidence I've had in a game all season. like if it comes down to a neutral site game where BYU fans travel and you are playing either Iowa State or Kansas State, or more than likely now Colorado, I feel good about that. And I just think, if we're going to have confidence that BYU is going to go 12-0, I just find it funny that confidence somehow dies the second we get into a championship game. That's just kind of this funny thing, this funny little narrative that we found ourselves in the last couple of days.
Well, no, I think you're totally right. Like, it doesn't make any sense because BYU continues to ball, but I think deep down, even with me a little bit, we're like the playoff committee because we also don't think that BYU can be this good this fast. Like, my heart will not let me dream big enough that BYU is even going to the conference championship game, let alone win the dang thing. Like, it's just so hard for me. Like, I'm still trying to get over the 9-game losing streak and feeling confident that BYU is going to be a 4-4 Utah team that's completely quit on the season. Like, I have a hard enough time accepting that it's like, I agree with you. Like, it's kind of soft that we're already preparing ourselves for a loss when BYU hasn't had one yet, and they've made it clear that they just refuse to do that.
I feel like I'm reminded of last basketball season during the non-conference when BYU was just hucking up threes and beating everybody, and they were kind of rigging the analytics, right? People would ask me, like, is BYU actually good? And I would always answer, until they appear to not be good, I think you have to accept them as good. And of course, they went into conference play and they started a bit slow, but they got it going and they had a winning record in Big 12 play. And so BYU was good all along, right? And I think it's the same principle with this football season. Until the magic stops, until there's a moment where magic just ceases to exist, like, I don't want to sound juvenile just throwing the word magic out there when it comes to this BYU season, but I think it's relevant
this week.
I mean, I think it's
magic happens.
Yeah, magic happens, right? Like, I think it's very much. I mean, look at TCU in 2022, right? They beat Michigan to go to the national title game. Like you can't tell me there's not a little bit of magic to that, right? Like there's that magic happens, magic exists. I think there's a teams capture lightning in a bottle. And I think, you've seen it several times this year. Like BYU, I'm knocking on all the wood I can right now. BYU hasn't had a crazy season derailing injury. Connor Pay got hurt, but Bruce Mitchell stepped in and has been just as good, or at least serviceable enough to not make that seem like a big loss. They're winning games in dramatic fashion. I mean, the SMU game, how many times did BYU have a chance to lose that game? And every time they just that option pitch to Miles Davis, right? I mean, that was the first moment where I was like, yeah, this is a different team. Like, I mean, to keep SMU 0-4 in the red zone or 0-5 or whatever it was. This team just continues. I mean, Jay Drew, my colleague, wrote in our predictions for what was going to happen on Saturday. He's like, look, Matt, this is a magical season for BYU, and BYU is going to beat Utah because it's a magical season, right? And until the magic stops, I think you have no reason to believe that anything but magic is going to happen, right? I mean, I'm not saying BYU is going to win a national title because I don't think magic can go that far just yet. Like you said, like BYU got too fast, too quick. I think there's still some growing pains they have to go through. But like Kansas State, again, would worry me just because they have a lot of film on BYU already and they've played them. And I think that gives teams an advantage. But like an Iowa State, a Colorado, or any sort of doomsday chaos scenario where somebody else makes the Big 12 championship game against BYU, like you got to pick BYU in that game. Like BYU controls its own destiny truly for the first time ever, right? Like if BYU goes undefeated and they win the Big 12, the committee absolutely cannot discount that. They can discount it now because there's still time for BYU to fall on its face. But at the end of the day, when all is said and done, you can't discount what BYU's done if they do it, right? And so, and like I said, like I love the added motivation that it gives you for rivalry week. I love that all the national writers, the Nicole Auerbachs and the Tom Fernellis and all these people are just hopping on the BYU bandwagon. Like this team isn't in the conversation because they're undefeated. That's part of it, but they're in the conversation because they're good and because their resume is so much better than so many other teams. Like being undefeated is kind of a nice icing on top, twinkle. It's a feather in their cap, but it's not the feather in their cap, right? I think the resume and the actual skill of the team far outweighs being undefeated. And it kind of reminds me of School of Rock, if you guys have seen that movie, where Jack Black takes the kids and they do the battle of the bands. And the parents show up and they're trying to bust him and they're super angry because it's a whole thing. And then they play the concert and the parents are just so excited. They're like, oh my gosh, that was incredible. And then they don't end up winning Battle of the Bands. I guess the committee in this sense awards somebody else. And the parents are like, no, School of Rock. Like what? Like they're devastated. And that reminds me of these national writers who discounted BYU going into the season. They ranked Jake Retzloff as the worst Big 12 quarterback. They put BYU as one of the worst teams in the Big 12. They didn't think BYU would go to a bowl game. And now they're kind of catching the vision, and they have BYU in the playoff to the point where BYU is so good, and they're so impressed and surprised by what they see that it's a legit national news story when BYU isn't ranked as high as they like, right? And so I love that. Just one of those things like, I mean, BYU is always kind of the cute, like, oh, like it's like a Boise State type thing where they're the quirky, cute team that's fun and they're a nice story. But now BYU's like, legit, they're relevant, they're in the conversation, and I like that people are kind of picking up on that, and they don't want to exclude BYU just because they're not an SEC team or they're not a Miami that has. I mean, they got BYU, right, and that's a great story, but he's not Cam Ward. And even though Miami's team isn't nearly as good as BYU's team, especially defensively, having Cam Ward just makes Miami. You know what I mean? Like, so I mean, I don't know how much longer we'll talk about this because I know there's more we want to talk about, but BYU's in the driver's seat to control its own destiny truly for the first time ever. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think being upset about it is a great way for people to kind of rally around a BYU nationally and see like, all right, let's see what this team can do. Like they're up against the wall. Like they're on fraud watch, right? Like, and BYU can go to Utah, win with some style points. Like there's this, I mean, this is the kind of thing, like, this gets in the locker room. The coaches are using this to try and rile people up. Like, I mean, there better be a picture of Jerry World in the locker room at BYU, like, hey, we're going here and everything we do is going to get to go to here, right? And so I mean, the motivation's a big deal. Jay Hill is a great motivator. Kalani's a great motivator. I'm really excited to see how this team responds, especially Saturday, because this is one of the most intriguing holy wars that I can remember.
100%. Like, and to put a bow on it, like the reason BYU is doubted again is because they weren't supposed to be this good this fast. And I still find myself getting nervous every single Saturday because I just did not expect them to be this good this fast. And every Saturday they have proven me wrong in the first 5 to 10 minutes of a game. And so like every time I get nervous about whether or not BYU is going to answer the bell, like I was nervous before Baylor coming off that Kansas State win. I was nervous against UCF. I was worried against Arizona coming off a bye with, Big Noon Saturday. And in every single one of those games, BYU answered the bell. So again, every time I get nervous, I watch them play football and I'm not nervous anymore.
Stay nervous, Joe.
So let's transition over to basketball. And I have a hot take. He has been at BYU for 5 minutes, and I am ready to declare Jagger Demon is the second best player to ever put on a BYU basketball jersey. Like the way that I felt watching him play. I know it's Central Arkansas. I know it's game 1. The way I felt watching him play, I have only felt 3 times in my life watching any professional athlete. The first one was Shohei Ohtani in 2021. I watched him strike out the side, get a base hit, steal a base, score a run, all in 1 inning, and then he hit a home run in his next at bat. The second time was watching Zach Wilson light it up in the Boca Raton Bowl against UCF, being there in person. And the third time was watching Jagger Demon hit a 30-footer for 3, pick off a pass, and throw down a left-handed poster all in a minute.
It's funny you mentioned kind of the parallels or the comparisons to other athletes, because literally I had this thought last night. Obviously, you guys know I'm a Commanders fan. Jaden Daniels for MVP, right? This has been a magical. See, I mean, what a great fall for me personally. Right. BYU's awesome. BYU basketball. The Commanders are good. And I just remember last night, like, I mean, I'm a big Egor guy. I'm really excited to see him. But just seeing how good he was, I kind of had the thought in my head, like, all right, the way you feel about Jaden Daniels and how excited you are and how much he means to you right off the bat is how everybody at BYU feels about Egor. And I was like, all right, like it kind of gave me, it was kind of like, all right, you have to tell this kid's story. You have to hype this guy up. Like this is your responsibility. And I was like, okay, I want to be part of the ride. Right. And so, I mean, you said it's Central Arkansas, but I don't care. That kid's 18, 19, first time playing college basketball. Like that dude looked like he came down from a higher league. That dude is man amongst boys. He's unbelievable.
He looked bored, to be honest with you. We were freaking out in the exhibition game because he didn't score and he went 0 for 3 from the field. And we're thinking like, oh, he's a good passer, but like he's not shooting. Do we have like a Ben Simmons situation on our hands? No, he was just bored. Like he was so bored playing against a Division II team. He just wanted to see how many different ways he could get his teammates the ball and help them score. Like he finished the night with 18 points, 11 assists, 4 steals, 4 boards. He could have had 18. Like he could have had 18 assists. He could have easily put up a 2020 game if BYU was hitting their open threes.
1,000%.
Like he was so good. The size, the speed, the athleticism, the basketball IQ, like the feeling that I got watching Ali Khalifa last year and how sweet that was to watch Ali Khalifa just drop dimes from the high post. Jagger Demon is that, but good at basketball. Like Jagger Demon is that, but also like a top 5 pick in the NBA draft.
Yeah. I tweeted
Jagger Demon is that with like defensive and offensive ability aside from passing, like with the handle, like just all of those things. He's 6'10" and he's a point guard. He's hitting 30 footers. He was 4 for 7 from 3. How are you supposed to guard that?
You can't. And to your point, like,
and he's on our team.
It's like you said boredom. I think the scary thing was just how passive his game felt. Like it didn't feel like he was ever really pressing the issue. He wasn't, trying to kind of take over. And if you watch his highlights when he won that Adidas like U18 championship in Barcelona, there were moments in that game where you're like, okay, like he came down the court. This was his game to close out, and he closed it out. And there was more pressing there than I saw against Central Arkansas because he didn't need to. He like coasted to those numbers that you just rattled off.
It was the easiest 18 and 11 I've ever seen.
I think not to get too much hyperbole or to blow this up. I don't even know if I can blow this up to more than it actually is, but Travis Hansen was a big component in getting Jaeger to come here. And he told a couple of fans after the game that this was about 75% of what he's seen that Jaeger is capable of. And it just looks so easy. And the players around him are going to benefit so much. Like you look at Richie Saunders, like Richie had some of the most wide open corner threes that I have ever seen in my entire life, because by the time Jaeger got to the middle of the paint, like there's nothing else that you can do besides crash, and he just dishes it out and he sees the guy like every time. And his passes to Cannon Catchings and all those alley-oops were perfect. He's throwing little underhand passes to Foose, who's running and has an easy layup. Like when you watch where that ball is hitting his teammates, like it's like right in that shooter's pocket. Like if you like really watch college athletes, like periodically they'll wing one out to the same places he is. Their teammates are having to reach out. It's throwing off like their rhythms. The timing's off. All of a sudden they can't get that shot off against a guy closing in. But Jaeger is just like we talk about with quarterbacks, like hitting them between the numbers. Like that's literally what he's doing. And he's giving these guys time to catch, release. And it's just like against Central Arkansas, it just looked like shooting practice out there. Like it looked like shoot around.
It looks like it's like he's on 2K and the sliders are all the way up. Like
for real.
So much better than everyone else.
Like there was a play that kind of made the rounds on Twitter a little bit, where Demin comes up, sets a pick top of the key, rolls to the free throw line, gets the ball at the high post, and I watched it in slow motion. But you see two defenders converge on Demin. Foose, the play was designed for Foose to cut to the hoop, and Central Arkansas, whoever their big man was, denies Foose, and within a split second, like it was as fast as you can blink, Jaeger throws a no-look pass to Trevin Nell for a wide open three in the corner. Like to your point, Trevor, like shooter's pocket, difficult pass, no-look pass within a split second. Like you made the point, Trevor. I don't want to steal your take, but like it looks like he's been playing with these guys for 3 years, and he's been on the floor with them for 3 minutes, and he's already throwing lobs with ease. Like he already knows exactly where every one of his teammates is going to be at any given time. And it's beautiful. Like it's that feeling I got watching Ali Khalifa with athleticism attached to it. And it's just he's so good. Like Cannon Catchings, future first round draft pick, finished the game with 17 points on almost 50% shooting from the floor. He was the second best freshman on the floor. What is life? What is this BYU basketball team?
And one thing I saw, I mean, everybody was just the fact that you got the field of 68 saying like, hey, the height for Jaeger should have been the same as Cooper Flagg. Like literally it took one game. It took a half of one game for everybody
against Central Arkansas.
Against Central Arkansas. Because like when Jimmer happened, like Jimmer was kind of a slow burn over several years. Like he had the Arizona game, he had the Florida game in 2010 in the tournament. And then against San Diego State, it kind of just like blew up and became this national thing, right? Like Jaeger is just day one, like Fran Fraschilla, who loves BYU, we know, he had dropped after the game. He's like, Egor Demin he comped him to Kresimir Kosic. And I think Kosic is maybe you could debate whether or not he's the best BYU basketball player. I think he's in the conversation. I mean, he's top 3 at least, but he's definitely the most important. Like the Marriott Center would never have been built if not for Kresimir Kosic. Like, I mean, he changed basketball. He made BYU. I mean, he was unreal. And just because he decided to go and basically help establish the church in his home country instead of go to the NBA, I think he gets forgotten a bit. But I mean, Kresimir Kosic is kind of a similar player, like that really kind of size of a center or a power forward who passes like a point guard, can play all 5 positions, just takes over the game. Like, this is our generation's Kresimir Kosic. And the fact that after one game, sure, he's another European recruit who comes over and is the real deal. But it took one game for people around the country to be comping Egor Demin to BYU's only player to be a Naismith National Basketball Hall of Fame member is bonkers. Like, that's incredible. Like, what is he going to do against Baylor and Kansas? And like how high is this thing going to go? Because this is unbelievable.
Buy your tickets now, BYU fans. Whatever you got to do. I don't care what you got to pay. I don't care what plans you got to cancel. I don't care what girlfriend you got to break up with, what relationships you got to reconsider. You have to watch Jagger Demon in person. He might be the best basketball player we will ever see at BYU again, at least until next season.
What's crazy, and we were talking about this last night, is and you kind of alluded to it a little bit with talking about cannon catchings as well. He didn't light up like the scoring sheet, but I really liked what I saw from Elijah Crawford last night. Like, I thought his hustle was good. I thought he moved the offense well. You know, he had his jitters and he missed a couple, he bricked a couple of shots, but you take away Jaeger and you take away Cannon, and I walk away from that game feeling pretty good. Like, he's a freshman, he'll figure it out. The problem is Elijah Crawford got a little bit blitzed by the fact that Jaeger and Cannon are also both freshmen. And so we're tweeting back and forth and we're kind of like, he's kind of struggling. No, I think Cannon and Jaeger were just excelling, like noticeably.
Do you remember what it was like watching Dallin Hall as a true freshman? I think he hit a game winner in his first game against Idaho State. And we're thinking that boy is the truth. That's the kind of level of play that like Elijah Crawford had last night. In any other year, any other basketball team, we'd be talking about Elijah Crawford as the point guard of the future. The problem is he's currently playing behind 2 first-round draft picks in the NBA draft. Like, to your point, like the early struggles when BYU was up 18-15 with 10 minutes to go in the half. Like, I think BYU fans were a little nervous, and I think the players were a little nervous too. Like, newcomers like Kenan Catchings, Elijah Crawford, Mawel Mag, they were a combined 1 for 10 in the first 10 minutes of the game. And it took them a second to settle down, but like BYU was getting shots. I think at that point, BYU was out shooting Central Arkansas 21 shots to 11 at that point. And Central Arkansas was just hitting their shots and BYU wasn't. But then again, as BYU just settled down, they got into a rhythm, started hitting a couple threes, and that 3-point lead turned into a 14-point lead in about 2.5 minutes. So it's, like, I thought to your point, Trevor, like, I wasn't overly impressed with Elijah Crawford, mostly because he played like a freshman a little bit. Like, he was a little bit out of control, was throwing up shots he probably shouldn't have. He had 3 personal fouls yesterday, which is a point guard is, again, that just tells me you're pressing a little too much. So I think he'll figure it out. Hopefully he won't have to a ton, because you have a Dallin Hall who's a 3rd-year player at BYU. You have a Jagger Demon who is, already said it, top 2 BYU basketball players ever. Like, we don't need Elijah Crawford to be good this year, but I think BYU is going to be up in enough games that he's going to get plenty of run, and we're going to be talking about him in 2 to 3 years down the line as a player of Dallin Hall's caliber, if not better.
Yeah, I think it's great because Dallin Hall was kind of thrust into that had to be the guy role right away. He didn't really have a ton of grace for a while, and especially last year too. Like, I mean, some of the discourse about Dallin Hall in mine was so annoying just because he was by far BYU's most valuable player last year. Maybe not the best player, but most valuable because he was leading the team in minutes. He was the primary facilitator. They didn't have anybody else who could do what he did as a ball handler. And now you have 3 or 4 guys. I mean, Egor might be BYU's primary facilitator this year. And I'm really excited to see what Dallin can do maybe away from the basketball as like a 2, because this NBA, positionless offense that Kevin Young is going to bring, I think is going to make everybody so much better. And I think that Egor's passing is just going to open up. I mean, it's like you said, like BYU had so many more shots than Central Arkansas. It's just hit your shots because Egor's going to find you. But I love that Crawford can kind of grow into what he's supposed to be without immense pressure. Like, he doesn't have to save the day on day one like Dallin Hall did. I mean, injuries withstanding, they don't have to ask very much of Elijah Crawford, and I think that's what's going to make him so valuable next year and beyond in life without Egor, and then eventually life without Dallin. So I think I mean there were plays he had that impressed me, but it was a lot of raw pressing, kind of like Joe said. I mean, I mean, he's going to be good, right? He's a 4-star. He's a Stanford commit that they flipped, right? Like, this is a legit player, but I think I like that there's a level of patience that we could all have with Elijah, where it's not expecting the world of him on day one. And I mean, who better to learn from as a point guard than Dallin Hall and Egor, right? You get a mature veteran and you get an NBA lottery pick, and then with an NBA coaching staff, this dude lives a charmed life. The grass is not greener outside of Provo, let me tell you.
Yeah, it was to your point, Jackson, and then just one last thing that I wanted to touch on with this game. But, a couple years ago with Dallin, it was like, come on, freshman. And then this year with, at least for me, whenever Elijah did anything, it was like, all right, freshman, you get yours, and, we'll be up 40. And, his little putback showed some of his athleticism. And I thought, again, he would pick point guards up at three-quarter court and ride them all the way down, which I really appreciated. I think that's great effort. I think that's something when you have a Dallin Hall coming back from sickness and whatever, if you need a guy that has fouls to expend, that's something that he can do, and he can be disruptive. And I think that's awesome. But one of the things that really stood out to me last night is I think what I expected coming in was just kind of this unstoppable offensive force, which later in the game we got. But at the beginning, what really started creating separation was BYU kind of just stiffening their necks and playing defense. That's the first thing that I noticed, is they really kind of locked in. There were a couple shots for Central Arkansas that went in, and then Kibakeda, they threw Mawat Mag in there, and I think that kind of changed the tone as well. And they just kind of said enough. And all of a sudden, you blink and we're up 15 because now the shots are falling. But now Central Arkansas is airballing every other shot attempt, and there's people closing out, and they've all got incredible length. And I think that, to me, the big question coming into the year for Cannon Catchings as far as the NBA goes was, well, he can shoot at an NBA level, but can he defend at an NBA level? Well, 5 minutes in here, I'd already recorded 2 blocks. And then Jagger, it's okay, yeah, he can facilitate, he can do these things, but how can he defend? Well, he had 4 steals, tied for second most all time in a freshman debut. The defense, if you can rely on that defense to kind of lock in until everybody warms up, you're going to be able to win a lot of games. And so that was something that I was really impressed with last night. We saw Jackson said, the positionless offense, but then we saw really good lockdown, switch man-to-man defense that the NBA also brings. And we've got guys that can defend almost every position because of their length.
One last stat to add to what you're saying. Last year, I thought BYU's interior defense was an issue, especially like we saw in the NCAA tournament with Foose for as good as Foose and Khalifa were on the offensive end, they didn't add a lot of rim protection, I felt. BYU last night had as many blocks as field goals allowed in the paint.
That's so crazy.
8 blocks to 8 field goals allowed in the paint. And I'm pretty sure Central Arkansas shot something like 8 for 24 in the paint. Their coach came out at halftime and said, yeah, we're not going to be able to score down low. And he just kind of like admitted that on national television. So it's, which great. Like that's what adding a Keba Keita will do for you. That's what adding Kenan Catching's athleticism will do for you. That's what adding Mahalo Bošković, underrated player. I think he's going to be. I think he is going to quietly, again, any one of these guys in any given year would be the star of this team. It just so happens that this year's Dalton Nixon is also going to the NBA at some point. So
that's a great line. That's the line of the episode.
It's great.
One more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just kind of put a bow on basketball talk. I don't think there's a more, I mean, Egor, obviously what he did was insane. I don't think there's a more perfect play that represents the new era of basketball in Provo than the Keba Keita putback dunk off the free throw.
Oh my God.
I didn't know that was allowed. I didn't know as a 12-year-old, do you know how bad I wished to, I grew up in the era of Lob City with Blake Griffin and Chris Paul. And you know how badly I would watch BYU basketball and just be like, man, I wish BYU had someone who could dunk. That would be cool. That would be rad. So nifty. And now BYU's got guys doing tip dunks off free throws. We got Kenan catching lobs at the top of the square. Again, I am not used to this. I don't know what to do with my hands because I'm not used to BYU having this level of athlete. There's just too much good going on in Provo for me to keep up with any of it. We're an hour in and we haven't even talked about the freaking Holy War because there is just too much good going on in Provo.
When I tell you, I scared the living daylights out of my 6-month-old when Kiva put that ball back, because I'm holding TJ and TJ's awesome. Love the kid to death. He's a ton of fun. He's always smiley.
Glad you cleared that up for us.
Yeah,
I was worried.
Yeah, kid sucks. No, just kidding. He's awesome. He is teething though, so that's not fun. But we're just sitting watching the game. I'm talking to him like he has any sort of idea what's going on. And Kiva puts that dunk back. And I get out about halfway before I try to reel it back in. And he just turned to me with the biggest eyes ever. just starts kind of tearing up and couldn't even enjoy the moment because I was too busy realizing that I nearly scared the crap out of my son. But he'll get used to it. My daughters came over and high-fived me, so they're at least getting context clues that good things are happening. But Keba Keita, quit scaring my kid. I put that on you.
Okay, we got things to discuss. You know how? So about a half hour ago, I said that every time I get nervous for BYU football, I watch them play. Well, every time I get nervous about BYU playing Utah and I get nervous about Utah, I watch them play too. And I feel much better. I keep waiting for this Utah team to be what we expected them to be. It's crazy how preseason expectations change because after that Oklahoma State game, I was thinking, man, Utah is a juggernaut. They're going to win the conference. Turns out Oklahoma State is bad and Utah is just slightly less bad than Oklahoma State. This Utah team, again, I keep getting nervous about this game. And then I just wrote my preview article. This Utah team is not that good, right?
The Holy War does a lot of really weird things. And that's why my heart rate,
does it?
Yes, my heart rate is going to be about 150 when that ball gets kicked off. But you mentioned it earlier, Joe. I was the same way with UCF. I know that we talked about earlier, how ironic it is that we believe they're going to go 12-0 and then lose the conference championship. And I pointed out how silly that was. So maybe me saying that I get this nervous before every game is hypocritical. But the second the ball gets kicked off and I watch BYU play, like things do tend to get better. The problem is, and the thing that I get nervous about is that it's flipping Salt Lake and it's flipping Utah and it's flipping Kyle Whittingham. And Morgan Scalley is good at what he does. And that defense is good. Like, irregardless of how awful this offense is, that defense is really good. If BYU can jump on these guys early,
It's over.
I think we're good. It's not about beating better talent, because I think BYU is the more talented team, but it is about crushing any sort of hope and belief early and just taking the wind out of the stadium and giving Salt Lake the kind of the UCF treatment. Like, oh, I don't want to be here anymore. It's halftime. I'm cold. BYU's up 28 or 17 or whatever the case may be. The offense looks dreadful for Utah. I don't want to be here anymore. Like, that's what it's about. If Utah gets any sort of momentum, this game gets really weird. For the same reason that, like, 2006, like, similarly, BYU was kind of supposed to go in there and just wipe the floor with them. They were the better team. They were going to win the Mountain West Championship. Like, it was kind of over. And yet Eric Weddle and all those guys, it got a little strange. And so that's what has me nervous. But unlike maybe other seasons of trying to account for maybe a lack of talent compared to what they have, there's a clear path, I think, to a victory, as long as the guys can do what they've been doing and do so efficiently.
If the defense is what we think they are, and I think the defense is pretty good, I think at the moment BYU scores 18 points, the game is over. Utah's offense is bad. Like, as bad as BYU's offense was last year, BYU is averaging like 10 more points per game than Utah is this year. For reference, in the month of October, in the first half against UCF, BYU led 4 touchdown drives, or was it 3 touchdown drives of 75 yards or more? Utah led 3 touchdown drives of 75 yards or more in the month of October. They've scored 5 touchdowns in their last 4 games. I put it out as my hate week stat of the day. $1 in Kyle Whittingham's wallet has an equal chance of being paid out in tithing as Utah's offense has of scoring a touchdown on any given drive. They are scoring on 10% of their scoring drives, or 10% of their drives result in touchdowns. That's bad. Why are they bad? There are 26 quarterbacks in the Big 12 that have thrown at least 15 passes. Isaac Wilson ranks 23rd, and Brandon Rose ranks 26th. Those are your options going in at quarterback. Brandon Rose against Houston, who is likely going to be the starter, would have had a better passer rating if he spiked every ball he threw into the ground.
That's such a great stat.
Like they're so bad. And like there's so much talk about BYU's run defense like being a weakness, and Locked On Utes, we got the transcript of that, and he was talking about how Mekhi Bernard was, running for 6 yards per carry recently. Mekhi Bernard is a beast. Like I would love to have Mekhi Bernard on my football team. He's also running for like 3.8 yards per carry the last 2 games because teams just realized that Utah can't throw. And so like, he's not RJ Harvey. He's not Ollie Gordon. Like I expect BYU's defense to be able to key in on the run and get Utah behind the sticks. And if they get Utah behind the sticks, they're not going to score. Like 3 of their 5 scoring drives over the last 4 games have been like 3 plays or less, because that's the only way that they can score. They can only score on big plays. Like they can't, like the game plan for BYU. There's 2 stats that kind of are like really good predictors of how good a team is: success rate and earn points per play, basically, which is called EPA. BYU is like 60th in success rate, which is like down to down. They're like the 60th best defense. But in terms of big plays, EPA, they're like the 20th best defense. The formula is to do exactly that. Let Utah nickel and dime you as much as they can and just let them make the mistake, because that offense is going to make the mistake and BYU is going to capitalize on that. Like that's the formula to beating this Utah offense.
Well, I
it's
think
like the Yankees.
Yeah, I think BYU the last couple of weeks has picked a really good time for the run game to pick up. Not even just pick up, but really just Hinckley, Rapati, and LJ Martin getting healthy. Because that's going to be a part of this too, is keeping your defense fresh, moving the football, like taking time away from Utah, like especially if you can consistently score, because now you have to speed everything up. And if Utah has to speed up with their third string quarterback against a team whose pass defense is really good, again, like you run into the same issue with UCF where it just snowballs. And obviously at the end of that game, we put in our third string guys and things got kind of hairy, but we still won by 2 possessions. But like during that third quarter, Jay Hill and the defense did exactly what they do all along, which is the second BYU builds any sort of lead, they pin their ears back because they know that the pass game has to be the thing that brings the team back, and they start throwing picks. Isaiah Glasser got one. Satu Ala got one. Like, and that's the key, is to beat Utah, you're going to have to do something similar that you did to UCF if you want to end the game early. Now, if you keep the game close, I still think BYU is the better team and can ultimately pull it out. But as far as like the key to a comfortable, like kneeling it out with 2 minutes left, but the game was over by the fourth quarter, jump on them early and let Rose throw them out of the game.
I feel like, I think Jay Hill's done an incredible job game planning for each individual quarterback that BYU's played this year. I mean, obviously, Jay Hill's been just such a beast for this team and what he's been able to accomplish as the defensive coordinator. I'm reminded of the Kansas State game where BYU took a lead and Avery Johnson was forced to throw the ball. It's kind of like when Lamar goes to the playoffs and the Ravens are down and Lamar has to throw every time and just can't get it done. That's what it felt like with Avery Johnson. Like BYU was like, all right, you got to throw. And he went like 15 for 28 through 2 picks. It was his worst game of his career. It was the first time he threw multiple picks in a game. And I think that's kind of the same way that it looks like it's going to be Brandon Rose, right? But let's say it's Isaac Wilson. Neither of those guys can really throw. So BYU is essentially going into that game with a lead because they're going to have to BYU can kind of load the box and try to stop Makai and just say, hey, if you're going to beat us, you're going to beat us with your arm because you're not going to, right? And so I think and Jay Hill, bad quarterbacks are Jay Hill's that like
BYU has the fourth best pass defense in the country by pass efficiency rating.
Yeah,
he made Sawyer Robinson look average. Sawyer Robinson's one of the 10 best quarterbacks in the country for Baylor. He made Kevin Jennings look abysmal. Kevin Jennings is probably one of the 15 best quarterbacks in the country. Like early in the season, we were talking about how BYU's defense hadn't actually played a quarterback that was that good. They had. BYU's defense is just that good. In fall camp, we were talking about BYU's quarterback battle being the battle of mid, and that Jake Retzloff hadn't improved at all, simply because he was going up against BYU's pass defense in practice every day. It all makes sense now.
It's just the most iron sharpens iron fall camp ever.
So, I like what you said about you're starting up points because they're Utah's offense can't throw. Maybe weird things can happen in the rivalry game. It would be really weird if all of a sudden Brandon Rose came out slinging it against this pass defense. When BYU's on offense, Utah is kind of the inverse of BYU's defense. We're down to down. They're really, really good.
What's up, boys?
Surprise guest.
Happening.
I just want to say NBA rigged. I just saw it for myself.
I'll
in person.
finish my
I don't
thought.
know if it's
Hunter
for
Miller,
money
everybody.
or ratings.
Down to down, Utah's defense is really, really good, but I think they're like 11th in success rate. But EPA, they're 40th, which means that down to down, they're really, really good. But you can get big plays on them, especially in the run game, where Utah is ranked 68th in EPA per rush. BYU is ranked 13th. And so that's where BYU wins the game, is get LJ Martin going, get Jake Retzloff rolling in the run game, get Hinkley Ropati going. And then if you can work that play action pass off that, Jake Retzloff, and according to PFF, is the 5th best quarterback in the country on play action. So if that's it, that's the formula. Like, get the ground game going, get into third and manageables, grind the clock. And this Utah team, honestly, I think they're going to quit.
Like, what do they have to play for at this point? I think BYU has done a good job this year too. Like, when teams are trying to not quit, like when Baylor is trying to save their coach's job in the second half, or when Oklahoma State gets Alan Bowman back in and he's trying to be the hero one last time in his career, or when UCF is on the verge of firing their defensive coordinator and they're trying to clamp down in the second half. Like, BYU is, you know, that Townsend triple meme of him as the Grim Reaper? That's what BYU is at this point. And so I think when BYU gets a little bit of momentum, like first, second quarter, Utah fans have seen this. I mean, Utah is one of the biggest dumpster fires in the country right now. What Utah fan is going to want to stay if BYU is up by more than 10 points in the second quarter? What Utah fan is going to want to sit in that stadium in butt cold temperature at night when they could just go home and not have to deal with watching their rival wax them at their house, right? Like, just early offense and early momentum is such a big thing, because BYU could literally turn that stadium blue by the end of the game. And that's so huge.
I want it so bad. Utah fans, as you're walking out, just hand me your ticket.
It's one of those things where, like, my confidence comes in the fact that in order to beat BYU, Utah is going to have to do things that the last several weeks they have not been able to do. And that's score a lot of points. Like, keep up with an offense that scored 30 plus points in like 5 straight P4 games. And then on the flip side, for BYU to lose to Utah, they're going to have to be unable to do things that they've been able to do all season. And just the likelihood of both of those things happening seems not great. Again, it's the Holy War. Like, it's like the upside down at times, it feels like. Strange things happen. This feels like one of those times where, like, one of the strange things happening would be if just the wheels fell off entirely for BYU and Utah somehow found a way to put all of their wheels back on at the same time. It's just kind of, I'm nervous.
Take like 3 turnovers.
Yeah,
it
like
would take 3 turnovers in plus territory for Utah to win this game.
Like, the closer we get to the game, it's like I'm realizing that the reason I'm nervous, like every time somebody asks me, like, why are you nervous for this game? The answer is because the Holy War is weird. It's not like some palpable thing. It's not like, oh, a certain player, like the defense has my respect for Utah, but like there isn't like a certain player on the offense. There was one in Money Parks, but he's out for the season.
Rest in peace.
But like there's not anything on paper that freaks me out. It's just the overall just general like weird atmosphere, like Salt Lake thing that freaks me out. And I just don't know how thick it needs to be on Saturday for that to like make all the difference.
One thing too, I mean, I know the Holy War is the upside down, but Utah hasn't played a team as good as BYU this year. Like, BYU is so much better than the best team Utah's played at this point. I don't even know who would that be? Like Arizona State? Probably.
Yeah. No, Arizona State whoop that booty.
Yeah, like and in recent Holy War history, I know it's kind of it feels like a million years ago, but in 2019, when Utah was so much better than BYU, obviously it was the first game of the season. Week ones are weird, but like the last time that the visiting team was so much better than the home team, Utah still won by 18. And I'm not saying BYU's, I mean, I'm just like, it's not totally out of the picture for BYU to go on and just whoop Utah, right? Like I know people like to think the Holy War is always super close, but there's been blowouts before. And you don't think that this game matters to Kalani and Jay Hill and Aaron Roderick and all these guys that have been at Utah or maybe played at Utah, coached at Utah, or some of these in-state recruits that they've brought in and these guys who have been on the team. I mean, you got guys on this team that beat Utah in 21 and saw how much it mattered. Like, you don't think any of that, like, to be that much better than Utah coming in and to go to their place, like, you don't think that's going to get them amped out of their minds to just effectively end Kyle Whittingham's career, basically? Like, this is a great, as great a script as you could write.
And there's like, it's being handled in a good way too, that I like really appreciated. Like, I personally, Jalen Glover, I believe is his name. Like, I love the whole like F BYU thing. The Cold War comment was a little funny. Hence why I think Kyle, is bringing in those indoctrination classes. But like, I love that part of it. I think when you're the underdog, I think that's kind of an attitude that you need to have, right? Is like, we're not afraid of these guys. On the flip side, now that BYU's kind of in this position that we haven't been in a while, obviously the 9-game losing streak and whatnot to Utah, like, we haven't had an opportunity to be in this position for a while. But to be the team that's supposed to win, and you sit down and you watch Hinckley Rapati, and he's humble and he's given his props to the Utah defense. And it just kind of feels like, for the team that really probably could go in and win by 3 scores, they forgot to tell those guys. Like, they forgot to tell themselves that they're that team. They're going in understanding this game's weird, this game's tough, it's in a tough environment with a good defense, and we have to be ready. And I think you add that in with everything that you just mentioned, Jackson, and then on top of that, the disrespect, like this whole podcast is coming to a head here, like the disrespect around the college football playoff committee to BYU, the excitement that BYU just seems to be really good at every sport right now with football and now basketball. Like, the fact that this team is coming in with an attitude of humility and like understanding how big of a game this is gives me a lot of confidence that, like, for the first time since 2006, BYU is walking out of there with a dub.
And I think too, Kalani's had some great wins at BYU. Kalani was a home run hire. I know in years past, people have critiqued Kalani, and I think at this point, he's reached a Mike Gundy status where it's like, no matter how bad things may get, you just have to ride with Kalani because he gets it and he's going to get the job done, right? And so I think Kalani's had some great wins. He's had some upsets. He's had some dramatic wins. I think Saturday could be the Kalani Sitake moment at BYU, where he just goes up to Utah and he has a chance. I mean, I know it's a late game, but it's still one of the bigger games of the day in terms of intrigue. He has a chance to go make the loudest statement of his life at BYU, where he could go thump their rival, the team that everyone thought was going to be in the CFP this year, was going to steamroll the Big 12 year one with his team that everybody counted out from day one, and just kind of, they flipped the script, and he could go in there and just thump Utah, make all the CFP committee people look dumb, jump their rankings. Like, there's a chance for style points. Like, this could be the Kalani Sitake game at BYU at the end of the day. I know he beat Wisconsin. I know he beat Boise. I know he beat Baylor, and he's already beat Utah. But this could be the game where it's like, yeah, everything went BYU's way. This is the game that you just kind of like, these were the glory days of BYU. BYU just thumping people. And it's Utah at Rice-Eccles, which is the worst name for a stadium ever. I think just sounds so weird. I had to drive past it a couple times a week because my wife is a Trader and goes to the U now, even though she still very much bleeds blue. She's very much on the bandwagon still. She's right.
Sleeper cell.
The sick need the physician, Jackson.
Exactly.
The sick need the physician.
She's there to comfort those in need of comfort for their life choices. But I'm just kidding. But that's the thing. Like, this could be the game where Kalani Sitake just goes in and just kind of, if this wasn't on the podcast, I'd say something so different. But this is the game where he can just kind of like at the end just go like, "Yep, masterpiece." This is his masterpiece opportunity. This is his chance to reach. This is his chance to be one of the all-time greats as BYU, which he already is. But like, this is his chance to kind of just like cement that. I think.
If this is 2020, this is at Boise. Like we talked about at the beginning of the year. Like we talked about this at the beginning of the podcast, like the similarities. If you could give us a Boise type win, like even if you give up, what was it, like 20, it was like 21-52 or whatever. Like nice. Like I'm all for it.
I need a post-game air raid pick of Retzlaff, Roberts, Lassiter, and like Parker Kingston after that game.
Keelan Marion. Get the Marion slander out of here, Jackson.
What's that?
Get the Marion slander out of here.
I like my boy Keelan, bro. I like Keelan. I was trying to think of who the Dax Milne equivalent would be, and I'm like, it's a short, cold white boy. It's Parker Kingston.
Jeez. All right, prediction time.
2020.
Prediction time. My hot take is, I think BYU, the path to victory ultimately, the path to victory is take care of the football. And I think Jake Retzlaff has gotten a lot better with taking care of the football quietly. Every time I hear Jake Retzlaff's name mentioned, it's always that he's a little bit of a gunslinger that has a tendency to turn the ball over. He's only had 4 turnover-worthy plays in his last like 150 dropbacks in conference play. I think he's better. Like I think those turnover worthy plays are behind him. I think the riskiness is behind him. I think my hot take is BYU has 0 turnovers in Rice-Eccles Stadium. I am not as enthusiastic about the final score as you guys might be. I'm going to say 24-13, just because I do have a lot of respect for this BYU defense. And the last time that BYU scored more than 30 points on a Utah defense was the last time they went up to Rice-Eccles Stadium and won in 2006. So I'm kind of the opinion that it's like, I have a lot of respect for Utah's defense. I think BYU's offense is really good, but even the really good offenses that Utah has played have only been able to score, 20 to 27 points. So I'm going to say 24-13. And I would be thrilled with that margin.
Yeah. To be clear, I'd love the Boise State outcome. I ain't picking that as our score. Just so we're clear.
BYU is ranked number 9. They were against Boise on the road.
True. I'm gonna say 31-17. I think Utah
scores 17.
Well, I think they come out with a little bit more juice. And that leads to, a score, them scoring really it'd just be 3 more points than they've been scoring the last couple of weeks. So I guess 3 points is extra juice. I don't know, but I'm going to say 31-14 or 17, 31-17. And man, I feel like with my streak, Joe, this has got to be a good one. Let me see. I'm going to say Jake Retzlaff 4 total touchdowns.
Oh my gosh.
And if I get this one, I'm retiring. I'm not giving another hot take for the rest of the season. I refuse. But
4 total touchdowns for Retzlaff would be unreal. That'd be like all-time rivalry performance.
I listening to him, I know it's just it's their media availability. Everyone sounds good behind a microphone before you've got to buckle up the chin strap. But Jake Retzlaff, the first person he called to understand the rivalry was John Beck. And so I think he's going to lock in. And I think most importantly, the guys around him are going to lock in and respond as well. And I think Jake benefits from that. And ultimately we benefit from Jake. So
gotta love Jake. Retz live, Retz laugh, Retz love. I'm kind of more on Joe's side of this. I think there will be some ugliness. I think BYU will win. I think it'll be BYU will win more convincingly than the final score entails. I think BYU will win 20-10. I think BYU gets 2 touchdowns, 2 field goals. Utah's offense still looks bad. BYU will just drain a bunch of clock with kind of those long drives that they had at UCF. I think that's kind of the formula that they're going to have, and it's going to be a very hearty 20 points, right? Like it's going to be 20, but it feels like 30. And it's still a rivalry game. It'll be close score wise, but like the last score was 26-17, and it felt like BYU outplayed them by 40 points, right? Like the scores in this game just get weird. Except for like Tavon Thomas, nobody on Utah came to play that day. And so, I mean, Mekhi Bernard could have a good game. Somebody could do something for Utah, but I still think BYU wins by 2 possessions, 20-10. It's a satisfying win, even though I know we want style points in this game, but I'll believe the style points when I see them. I think it'll be kind of an unsexy score, but a win is a win. That's the most important thing. Beating a rival on the road in a conference game by 10 is good enough for the committee to bump BYU up a spot or 2. And so, I mean, the win is the most important thing. I think it'll be 2010.
To close, I would like to read off my Utah Hate Week stats of the day. Why? Because I hate Utah. And I don't like Utah. In fact, I hate them. I hate everything about them. I think their program, their team, their fans are classless. They don't deserve to win, and I'm glad we're going to send them home on Saturday with a loss. With that, since 2019, since Tyler Huntley uttered the words "they so poo-poo," Utah has arguably been on the greatest run in their history, which includes a win percentage of 67.1. Since that time, over that same 6-year span, BYU has a win percentage of 70%. Since 2018, Utah has signed 6 high school quarterbacks with a 24/7 rating of 89.3. In those QBs' Utah careers, they have combined to throw for 112 fewer yards than Jake Retzloff has this season. With a win at Utah, Jake Retzloff will match Cam Rising's career mark of 5 road wins as a starter.
That's my favorite stat. That's just
that might be my favorite.
That doesn't feel real, but it's unreal.
Kalani Sitake and Kyle Whittingham each have had one season in the CFP era of 2 or fewer losses. In Kyle Whittingham's one season, Utah played 5 games.
That's a good one too.
In honor of Jalen Glover calling it the Cold War instead of the Holy War, no Utah quarterback has registered a 3,000-yard, 30-touchdown season since the end of the Cold War. Utah's first top 9 college football ranking came out in 2019 in Utah's 9th year in a power conference. BYU accomplished that same feat in year 2. This one's a good one too. Elisa Tuiaki and Morgan Scally were both hired in 2016. So from 2016 to 2022, when Elisa Tuiaki got fired, Morgan Scally and Elisa Tuiaki have each had 2 top 25 defenses in scoring defense in their tenure.
And wait, didn't one of those come in 2017 for Tuiaki?
2016 was they were in the top 25 in scoring defense. I can't remember, but still a bonker stat, right?
Yeah.
Utah defense is what Utah does. I like this one. Keanu Hill has a higher career passer rating than Cam Rising.
These are so good, Joe.
And last one. The last time BYU beat Utah was 2019. Ryder Lyons is BYU's biggest target in next year's recruiting class. He was just ordained a deacon, and somehow Cam Rising was a sophomore in college. Cougs by a freaking billion, man.